In late March 2020, a 42-year-old woman in Ohio fell ill with what seemed like a typical case of seasonal flu. Since she had been vaccinated and was relatively healthy, the infection was expected to be mild. When her symptoms became steadily worse after several days, however, she went to an urgent care clinic, which sent her home with over-the-counter flu medication. When she was unable to leave the couch after another few days, she called a friend who was a nurse, who immediately recognized her symptoms were highly abnormal, and called an ambulance for her. By the time she reached the hospital, one of her lungs had already collapsed, and her skin had started to turn purple. She had developed bacterial pneumonia as a complication, and was rapidly going into septic shock. To make matters worse, the COVID-19 pandemic had just been declared when she first fell sick, and her family members were almost prohibited from seeing her, as was the case with the patients in the rest of the hospital. However, as her condition worsened to become the most extreme of any patient in the facility, an exception was made in her case. It was a brief light in the long, dark nightmare ahead. To keep her vital organs working, the hospital staff had to draw immense quantities of blood from the woman's hands, legs, feet, and arms. Although this was sufficient to save her life while doctors worked on treating the infection, the resulting tissue death in her extremities led to the amputation of all 4 of her limbs. Her legs were amputated below the knee and her arms below the elbow, with each operation taking place 2 weeks apart. Doctors told her family that had they waited any longer in any of the cases, she would have lost each limb in its entirety, and possibly even died. On May 17, 2020, 2 months after the woman's first flu symptoms began, she was able to leave the hospital, though in a state she never could have imagined when she first entered its doors. Extreme heat can produce many kinds of horrible fates. Depending on where you are and the temperature around you, the air may no longer be safe, not only because of heat's effect on the body, but the ability of high temperatures to make their victims delirious and cause them to die in ways that would otherwise be easily preventable. During the month of August 1995, the city of Chicago suffered a brutal heat wave that left over 600 people dead in and around the city. Some of those who died had temperatures of 110 degrees Fahrenheit when their bodies were discovered. One of the heat wave's worst casualties was an unnamed man stuck in his personal automobile for unknown reasons and unable to get out. The man was already heavily intoxicated when he was behind the wheel, which left him further dehydrated, impaired his judgment, and accelerated his heat exhaustion. The car doors would not open. Temperatures during that morning reached 98 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning that they were even higher inside the car, which became like an oven in the scorching midday heat. The last sighting of the man alive occurred at 11:45 a.m. When somebody checked on him 2 hours later, they found him dead in the front seat, and with severe bruising all over his body. The last time he was seen alive, the man was screaming and furiously smashing his head against the windshield of his car, in a desperate but hopeless bid for escape. And that wasn't the worst part. When medical personnel examined his body, they found that the air conditioner switch was turned to the on position. But tragically, the car itself was turned off. This seems to indicate that the intoxication and heat exhaustion that the man had suffered had fatally impaired his decision-making. Moreover, skin slippage had occurred, meaning that the outer layers of skin on the man's body had separated from the layers below them, in the immense, concentrated heat inside the car. His temperature was 107.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Some fates are so horrible that they simply defy comprehension. On August 28, 2009, California Highway Patrolman Mark Saylor, his wife, brother-in-law, and daughter were driving down State Route 125 in a rented Lexus sedan. In what can only be described as every driver's worst nightmare, the gas pedal became stuck under the driver's side floor mat, and from there, the car's acceleration became uncontrollable on a busy freeway as the brakes could not slow down the car. The family vehicle proceeded at breakneck speeds of 120 miles per hour down a busy roadway with no hope of regaining control. One of the passengers called 911 in a panic, but there was nothing emergency services could do for their situation, as events rapidly deteriorated on the other end of the line. It was astonishing that the Saylors avoided a crash for as long as they did, as they were on the phone with 911 for nearly a minute, and had probably been experiencing sudden acceleration for an unknown length of time previous to making the call. Then things got worse. An intersection was rapidly approaching, exponentially increasing the danger of hitting another vehicle or obstacle. There was nothing to be done as the car went through the lights, its passengers holding on for dear life. The car barreled clean through the intersection without hitting any other vehicles, but hit a curb, went off the road, tore through a fence, and careened into the ditch before hitting a sloped embankment. The car then became airborne as it flew upward off the embankment and crashed on the opposite side of the San Diego River, rolling several times before catching fire. But by the time the car burst into flames, the Saylors were already dead. After finding the wreck, first responders said it was the worst crash they had ever witnessed. Although the car was never able to slow down, the brakes showed signs of extreme wear that investigators said would only have occurred through hard, consistent use over a very short period of time. To the rage of the public, it was discovered that the person renting the same car before the Saylors had returned it with a complaint about faulty acceleration. This disaster drew attention to a silent, ticking time bomb across the country. In the aftermath of the Saylor family's horrible fate, it was discovered that thousands of similar complaints had been filed about sudden acceleration over the last decade, and Toyota had to recall over 6 million vehicles within the next few months.